Schopenhauer's phrase hits hard because we all recognize the back and forth. When we desire, we suffer. When we achieve, we empty. He describes the mechanism with austere, almost clinical precision, and so it rings true even against our will. But the honesty of this diagnosis doesn't have to be a sentence. The pendulum exists, but the way we dance with it can change. What if the key wasn't stopping the pendulum, but learning to give it rhythm? This is where Nietzsche steps in as a countercurrent. Instead of calling for an aestheticizing of desire, he asks how to transform desire into a force for overcoming. Desire, for him, is not a moral defect. It is energy that demands form. When this energy encounters resistance and breaks through, something within us expands. Relief comes not from the arrival itself, but from the way we overcome the obstacle. The gift of the desire to overcome comes at a price no one tells you. It's paid for with anxiety when impulse becomes compulsion, with resentment when comparison hijacks the metric, with nihilism when the arrival disappoints. If you've ever felt the peak of an achievement subside too quickly, you know the price. The good news is that price isn't destiny. It's a rate that decreases when we modulate our desires. And modulation here doesn't mean amputation, but tuning. This video weaves together the two perspectives for practical, real-world use. We'll listen to the drivers that drive your choices, show why the process of overcoming tends to nourish more than the promise of arrival, and, ultimately, offer a simple protocol for making the pendulum swing in your favor. The thesis is straightforward. Schopenhauer accurately portrays suffering. Nietzsche teaches the art of moving through it. As between them, it's up to you to decide what grief, tenderness, and healing. If this resonates, stay with me for a minute. I'll show you 3 signs that the gift has begun to take its toll, and how to reverse the curve when they appear. From there, the map becomes clear enough for you to choose where to invest your next effort. This isn't sugar-coated self-help. It's attention engineering applied to desire. If Schopenhauer warns us about the pendulum, Nietzsche gives us the metronome. And when the beat hits, the back and forth becomes a sustaining rhythm, not a swallowing tide. Before any method, one must face the price of not modulating desire. The hedonic race transforms every victory into a starting line, and each finish diminishes what seemed grand yesterday. The bill arrives in the form of exhaustion that won't sleep, insomnia that won't erase, cynicism that poses as lucidity. When you get used to only measuring peaks, the valley becomes shame, and the body responds with tightness, tachycardia, and compulsive distraction. An open window brings light and noise. Left unchecked, the noise dominates the house. Imagine the short scene. 2 in the morning, finger scrolling through a timeline of philosophical dopamine. Another interview, another book excerpt, another habit chart. The head says it's study, the body says it's escape. The eyes burn, but the next piece promises the final answer. The result is a saturated mind that confuses accumulating ideas with digesting them, and emotional digestion is postponed until tomorrow. External noise clutters internal noise, and together they stifle the ability to choose where to take the next step. Now, the typical scenario. The person you love comments on an achievement, and without realizing it, you pull out the comparative ruler. Joy turns into a spreadsheet, a hug becomes a podium, and the conversation shifts to who performed better, who studied harder, who deserves more. Resentment, discreet, grows like mold in a dark corner. No one sees it at the time, but the smell lingers the next day. Relationships that could be a refuge become arenas, and the drive to win loses its celebratory edge. And the climactic scene, you get the job, the grade, the trophy, There's a party, photos, excitement, a day passes, and your chest returns to the same emptiness. The glow of arrival lasts less than the effort it took, and the question, "Is that all?" appears with the coldness of a bank account. This is where nihilism whispers that nothing matters, that every desire deceives, that the pendulum only hurts. Without modulation, the gift becomes a curse, because the internal narrative learns to depreciate everything that isn't the pinnacle. These costs erode the very ground beneath your feet. Interrupted sleep, impulsive decisions, focus replaced by screen urgencies, bonds strained by invisible metrics. The nervous system goes into hyper alert, interpreting any silence as a threat, any pause as failure. The price isn't just in subjective suffering, it's in the caliber of daily choices you fail to make because noise has taken precedence. If Schopenhauer's world describes the pain of wanting and the tedium of having, your concrete world shows the bill month after month when the volume is turned up to maximum. The good news is that volume has a knob, and in the next steps, you'll learn to adjust it precisely enough to regain your rhythm. Before entering the fray, it's worth establishing the rule of the world. Every gift is an aperture. Opening too much explodes. Closing too much extinguishes. Mastery is modulation. I call apertura the ability to let the energy of desire pass through without clogging or leaking, like someone regulating the amount of light entering through a window. Modulation, then, isn't a moral restraint. It's a fine-tuning of volume and direction so that the impulse works in our favor. The biding metaphor will be the two-sided coin, process and arrival. On one side, the pleasure of overcoming resistance. On the other, the confirmation of having achieved something. Long processes without arrivals become exhausting. Arrivals without process become empty. Those who prosper learn to turn the coin at the right time. Keep this in mind because you will be repaid at the end when the coin ceases to be luck and becomes an instrument. When I talk about modulating, I think of 3 small actions that change everything. Noticing the point at which the body stiffens, choosing the next clear obstacle, and defining the minimum measure of advancement that counts as progress. Apertura here means precisely the adjustment that keeps the system responsive without collapsing. If the flow accelerates too much, we create friction, and the internal narrative degrades the experience. If we stall, the momentum rots into rumination. Between these extremes, the coin turns with less loss. It is on this terrain that Schopenhauer and Nietzsche meet and diverge. Schopenhauer describes the pendulum between pain and boredom. Nietzsche responds with the will to power as the art of overcoming resistance. Reading the two together, the pendulum doesn't disappear, but its swing becomes a rhythm when the coin is turned at the right pace. Meaning, not from the elimination of desire, but from the ability to choose where and how it pushes. Why does this matter now? Because without this lens, the conflict that follows seems like fate, not dynamics. With it, you realize that excess and lack of openness are calibration errors, not character defects. Starting in the next section, we'll see how the gift begins to take its toll, inside, out, and in the environment. And with the map in hand, it will be easier to understand where the coin gets stuck. In the end, when we pay the metaphor, the coin leaves a trail of decision, not chance. The first friction is internal. The body triggers an alarm when desire loses its shape and becomes an automatic release. and the mind tries to justify what is already a compulsion as productivity. Microscene, you stare at the chart, your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and each update seems to promise relief. The mechanism is simple and cruel. Stimulus triggers emotion, emotion narrows attention, attention creates a narrative of urgency, and the narrative pushes a repeated decision that fuels the next cycle. This cycle isn't a sign of weakness of character. It's a sign of a lack of adequate openness. When the energy of impulse meets legitimate resistance and breaks through, it expands. When it encounters a smooth wall or an endless corridor, it bursts from within. That's why the same gesture that made you grow yesterday shrinks you today, because the balance between challenge and release has lost precision. The body tries to warn with stiffened shoulders, clenched jaws, and an agitation that lasts until dawn. And the mind responds with more goals when what was needed was less friction and more rhythm. The second layer is social. Relationships that could be a shelter become a stage, and the invisible ruler enters the room before the embrace. Microscene, a friend celebrates an achievement, and you notice your hand holding back the congratulations while your head opens the comparison spreadsheet. The mechanism here is also clear. The other person's joy touches an insecurity. The insecurity draws attention to a deficit. The deficit creates the story that you're worth less. The story turns into cold withdrawal or harsh competitiveness that cracks the conversation and dries up the affection that could nourish both of you. The third layer is systemic. The environment has learned to harvest the energy of desire and sell it back as numbers, and numbers begin to dictate the pulse of the microscene. The company changes goals with the ease of switching roles. The backlog grows with the appearance of normality, and the endless sprint rebrands fatigue as an acceptable standard. The mechanics repeat themselves on a larger scale. The metric appears. Attention is glued to the digit. The narrative reduces life to a scoreboard. The decision sacrifices sleep and relationships for a promise that is never fulfilled because there is always another step to measure. This escalation happens too quickly to be immediately apparent. First, you negotiate 5 more minutes of screen time, then swap dinner for a notebook of answers. And later, you start hearing half of your loved one's sentences and filling the rest with assumptions generated by tension. The desire for power, which could be the art of overcoming resistance, slips into the desire to master one's own discomfort and ends up dominating the people and processes around you. When you notice, the coin is spinning on its own in your hand, and the sound it makes is no longer music, but the noise of a machine that can't stop. If you recognized yourself in these 3 scenes, it's because the gift has reached the limit that separates power from wear and tear. And that's good to know, because the limit indicates where adjustment yields the greatest return. We don't need to erase the pendulum or swear to asceticism forever. We need a map and a way of measuring that restores dignity to the path. In a minute, the simple map to help you find your way. The myth says that those with great ambition suffer less because they go out there and solve it. It seems convincing because we look at the winners and forget the human cost of the journey, confusing prominence with serenity. In practice, strong desire without management increases friction, more comparison, more baseline tension, more haste to close unsustainable cycles. The pain doesn't disappear, it just changes its appearance. It becomes performative anxiety that sells itself as discipline. When the yardstick is simply arriving, everything that isn't a peak seems like a failure. Adjustment begins when we understand that a gift without management takes its toll. Impulse is raw energy, begging for direction, not a sentence to run until you break. Amputating it impoverishes. Releasing it formlessly enslaves. The work is to measure it, and measuring it means matching intensity with real resistance, so that each step increases your capacity instead of draining reserves. When the dose is right, the body slows down without losing traction, and the mind begins to find meaning again in the middle, not just at the end. The goal stops being to numb the pendulum and starts to rhythm it. To dispel the myth, we'll swap vague belief for an observable map. In the next section, you'll see where the coin gets stuck, the asceticism that saps desire, the hedonism of arrival that addicts us to peaks, and the operational center that measures tension and distributes attention. With a simple framework, it becomes clear when to pivot to the process and when to stamp the finish line without hidden interest. It's the bridge between understanding the narrative and transforming routine, where the will to power reclaims its art of overcoming resistance. Think of this map as an axis with two chasms at its ends. On one side, anesthetic, asceticism cuts off desire in the name of a pulseless peace, and over time transforms calm into apathy. On the other, the hedonism of arrival thrives on peaks, stacks goals like escalators, and calls anxiety motivation. Between these edges, there's an operational range where desire becomes a tool. You still want, but you choose resistance that educates rather than discharge that tires. The job of the rest of the video is to keep you in this range with budget-friendly criteria. The first criterion is the body as a barometer. Whenever you aim for a goal, observe in real time the point at which your muscles begin to lock, your breath shortens, and your jaw seeks to anchor tension. This is the sign that the coin has turned too quickly toward the finish line. Adjust by decreasing the demand 5 points or lengthening the delivery horizon, and see if the tone decreases without losing traction. If your body remains rigid, you're not choosing resistance, you're fighting a wall, and a wall doesn't bring back learning, only narrative bruises. When your body releases and your attention expands, you're back on track. The second criterion is the ratio of process versus screen time throughout the day. Process is any act that brings you closer to true mastery of the skill, even without immediate acclaim. Screen time here is consumption and checking that promises a shortcut. A healthy day has blocks where process leads and screens serve, not the other way around. When the ratio reverses, the mind thinks it's progressing because it sees progress, but the nervous system has only trained compulsion. As do a simple audit at the end of the day. If 3 blocks of work have become open windows and microchecks, you've pushed the coin into the void with a veneer of productivity. Rebalancing tomorrow means setting aside the crossing first and only the scoreboards later. To find your way on the map, use a 3-question test that doesn't require a spreadsheet. Ask yourself if the current challenge increases your ability to overcome similar resistance in the future, if your body responds with functional tension or stiffness, and if, in the end, you can describe what you learned without citing a number. If 2 answers lean toward the wrong side, you've slipped toward a ledge. Asceticism appears when you avoid useful micro-discomforts. Hedonism of arrival when you seek only the validation of the peak. Returning to the center means choosing a smaller obstacle, renegotiating the deadline, and measuring with a yardstick of competence, not audience. There are nuances that prevent false diagnoses. In periods of critical delivery, tension can rise without implying a lack of arrival. The key question becomes, for how long and with what recovery? Because center is also rhythm. In times of mourning or illness, processes shrink and screens grow, without this being a sign of moral decay. In this case, modulating means protecting the system with minimal process tasks, such as 10 minutes of deliberate practice, so that the thread doesn't break. The map doesn't judge, it guides. It reminds you that opening too much explodes, closing too much erases, and that measuring by the body and the proportion of the process puts you back in the corridor where the will to power becomes the art of overcoming. From now on, I modulate, neither numb nor overflow. This is the turning point that separates power from exhaustion, accepting that desire is a force that needs a compass, not a handbrake or a glued accelerator. When I modulate, I stop treating each task as a 100-meter dash and start measuring the quality of the step that takes me to the next step. The decision doesn't eliminate the pendulum. It teaches me to dance with it. I return to Schopenhauer's phrase and hear it with a different tune. Life oscillates between pain and boredom, yes, but the swing changes when the pendulum becomes a metronome. Those who try to stop it create frustration. Those who surrender to the rhythmless spin create exhaustion. Modulation is the active middle ground in which I choose the right resistance in the right order for the right time. It's not less will, it's will tuned so that effort produces expansion instead of noise. This shift has a simple test in everyday life. If the arrival occupies my entire imagination, I stiffen and confuse urgency with importance. If I avoid any friction, I atrophy the muscle of crossing. Modulation, then, is refocusing my attention on what I'm overcoming now, with a goal within my grasp and a criterion I can verify without external scoring. When I do this, my body relaxes, my mind opens up, and the work regains meaning. I want you to make this decision public with me, because a declared commitment changes the way attention behaves. If this reinterpretation of the quote clarified your understanding, comment, "I see now." If you prefer a practice reminder, write, "I modulate the gift." This small gesture marks a break with the logic of the permanent peak and signals that you are choosing rhythm over haste. And healing. You might fear losing your fire when you modulate. In practice, the fire burns best when it finds the right wick size. Regulating doesn't cool down, maintaining the flame to get through the long stretches where the return isn't immediately apparent. The result is an energy that can withstand new beginnings without breaking, capable of sustaining relationships and work without turning everything into a secret competition. This decision, repeated quietly before each block, becomes a habit that protects your day from unnecessary fluctuations. With the turn established, we move on to the how. Now, the practical protocol: verbs, tense, and criteria. This is the protocol that transforms ideas into motion. Each block follows the same grammar to fit seamlessly into your routine: verb, tempo, and criteria. Start by slowing down for 60 seconds with 4-4-6 breathing, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, and exhaling for 6 counts, until you feel your shoulders drop and your jaw release its lock. You're not wasting time. You're readjusting the tone of your nervous system so your attention stops chasing peaks and returns to seeing the path. When your body releases a halftone, the rhythm appears and momentum regains its usefulness. Repeat this first step before any significant effort of the day and observe the micro difference between acting under urgency and acting with rhythm. If your mind insists on racing, do another breathing cycle and use physical sensation as a guideline instead of external numbers. The test is simple and binary. Either the tension drops while maintaining traction, or you're fighting a wall. Walls don't teach. They just return costly frustration. If the wall persists, reduce the target by 5 points and check your body as a barometer again. Next, spend 2 minutes naming the aim and object of the current impulse, writing a line for each. The aim is to discharge the energy that demands release. The object is the contingent target your mind has chosen to execute this discharge. When you see on paper, "I want to discharge frustration," and "I'm aiming at my colleague's email," you open up space to change targets without denying the energy, which reduces damage and maintains potency. The key here is to have the aim formulated in a short sentence, clear enough so that you can choose another object if the first one worsens your life. Finally, flip the coin for 10 minutes. Translate arriving into overcoming by choosing a concrete, measurable obstacle of the exact size for a 6-10 effort. If the project is a study, the obstacle might be solving 3 new questions. If it's a relationship, it might be listening for 5 minutes without interrupting and reflecting in 1 sentence what you understood. At the end, mark the measure of progress that doesn't depend on external applause, such as accuracy rate, clarity of synthesis, or quality of presence. When the block ends with this record, the internal narrative begins to reward the crossing rather than the obsession with the score. If you want to reinforce the terrain, protect the entrance for 10 minutes with a single window and a single person without notifications, and notice how your attention stops fragmenting the effort you've just calibrated. As you are finally feeling safe to feel grief, tenderness, healing, and you begin to heal more wholesome sleep, fewer regretful decisions, and relationships less tainted by comparison, the pendulum finally returns, paid for. When you learn to consciously choose when to swing toward the process and when to seal the deal, the pendulum stops being a threat and becomes an instrument. The metallic sound that once sounded like a demand becomes a working rhythm, because effort begins to produce verifiable expansion, not just promises. Satisfaction stops dwelling at the peak and starts dwelling in the quality of the step that precedes it, which dilutes that "is that all" hangover after achievement. The gains appear first in the body and consolidate there. Sleep regains density because the mind no longer needs to watch scores during the wee hours, and the nervous system learns to recognize when it's had enough for today. Clarity improves because attention no longer jumps between digits and screens, but sustains the journey to the measure of progress you've defined. The same fire that once burned your patience becomes a heat that cooks ideas to perfection without rushing or losing timing. In relationships, the currency moves with more tact. By calibrating the arrival dose, you celebrate without a spreadsheet and listen without competing, which opens space for genuine cooperation. Small process rituals, like attention spans and understanding questions, replace the invisible ruler of who's winning. Affection breathes again because comparison loses the raw material that fueled it. And with that, the will to power returns to being an art of overcoming resistance, not people. At work, the decision to modulate creates a ripple effect. Goals no longer impose an eternal sprint, but instead mark learning cycles, which improves the quality of deliveries and the reliability of your pace. You start measuring competence instead of audience for critical decisions, and the sense of agency grows precisely because it's no longer tied to a volatile number. As this guide gave you tenderness and healing. When this gear clicks into place, the gift stops charging interest and begins to yield concrete dividends: sleep that restores, clarity that decides, and relationships that sustain. If this guide gave you a rhythm for desire, leave a comment with "I choose rhythm" or "I modulate the gift," and tell me which obstacle you'll overcome this week. This small gesture solidifies the midpoint decision and transforms the will to power into a traceable practice in your day. If the method helped someone in your life sleep better, decide more clearly, or love with less conflict, share the video and subscribe so we can continue practicing this way of spinning the coin together. The more people learn to pay less interest to desire, the more the pendulum becomes a metronome in all of our lives. Before closing, remember the image that accompanied us. Process and arrival are the same coin, and mastery lies in knowing which side to focus on at each moment. When your body becomes a little lighter and your attention stops watching scoreboards, you know you're in the operational center. When the post-peak emptiness threatens to return, you remember that satisfaction lies in the quality of the previous step. It's simple enough to fit in your pocket and dense enough to sustain a lifetime of learning. Thank you for making it this far. Now, it's your turn to choose the next obstacle with the care of someone who knows their own pace. Until next time, take care of your mind, your soul, and your truth. You're not alone on this path, not anymore.